Welcome to episode number 102 of the Marine Layer podcast. We welcome on Adam Jude, sports writer for the Seattle Times. He'll be down there covering spring training in Peoria with spring training on the horizon. We discuss a couple of storylines with Adam that we're looking forward to, and then Lyle and I ourselves will take a look at a couple of other storylines we're looking forward to as spring training nears.
Your reminder before we start the show, if you're listening to the podcast, make sure to download, make sure to rate and review 5 stars. You're doing us a big favor if you do. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that big red subscribe button. It's free, takes about 2 seconds to do. Like and comment as well on YouTube where our full video podcast is. And then check us out on social media. We're on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube Shorts at Marine Layer Pod.
Let's get it rolling.
The pitch from Acevedo. A drive deep to right field, down the line. The Mariners win this game 2-1. The dream lives. They're going to the playoffs. 1-1 from Jansen. There you go, left field. We got a tie ball game. Julio, oh baby, what a moment. Tie ball game at 7-7.
And we welcome you to this episode of the Marine Layer podcast, part of the Just Baseball Podcast Network, recording here on Monday evening, February 12th. And I'm glad Julio spent all that money on a Super Bowl ticket and actually stayed for 4 quarters. He showed how much he cared.
Is this in reference to one Tommy Pham, who still does not have a team yet, by the way?
No, he doesn't. And there might be a reason for that, because if we take a look at Julio, he stayed all 4 quarters because he wanted to know what it felt like, at least energy-wise, down on the field when they win a championship. And he's like, I had to stay. I had to see what that felt like. I'm starving. I don't think Tommy Pham was starving. He was sitting on his couch after leaving at halftime. He had really good seats, too. What is he doing?
Yeah, so for those who don't know, Tommy Pham was at the Super Bowl and then left mid-game to go watch the rest at home. So I have 2 theories with this. He either did not pay for his own ticket, or if he did, that's just delusional behavior. Because how could you shell out thousands of dollars for a Super Bowl ticket and then say, you know what, I'm going to leave. Like, see ya. I flew to Vegas for the Super Bowl, for Super Bowl week. I went to the game. Now I'm actually going to leave.
Now, I'm going to say he didn't actually buy that ticket, because those tickets where he was sitting was probably, $140,000 if that was going to be resale. So I'm going to say he's there on behalf of some brand. If I'm going to take a big giant swing at that, that doesn't mean you should leave at halftime. I didn't even like the halftime performance. Dude, just open your phone. I just watched a video on how the Raiders installed great Wi-Fi in the stadium. So when Usher's performing, you can sit there on your phone and scroll on Twitter while you wait for Usher to leave the field in the second half to start. But no, Tommy Pham rather sat in that crummy traffic that I saw to go back home in the middle of one of only 58 Super Bowls that have ever been played so far. So congrats, Tommy.
I think you're in the minority of people that didn't like the Usher performance. Most people really loved it. I liked it.
You know, I must be setting my expectations too high. The 2021 Super Bowl performance blew me away. Like it really did. I went back and watched it during the Usher performance because I was like, this one is way better. It was the one with Snoop Dogg and Eminem and 50 Cent and Kendrick and Dr. Dre and in LA. And I thought that was just awesome. And, you know, the Usher one, I thought,
So I have 2 things to say to that. That's my favorite one, too. So I'm in agreement with you. I don't know if every performance can reach that level. But also, when did you start listening to hip hop music? Like, did you listen to Usher? Because I grew up listening to Usher when I was 11, 12, 13 years old.
I listened to some Usher, but I didn't become a total music person until I was in college. So
that's probably why.
It was an adjustment period. And again, it was just like kind of okay. It didn't really sound like a very good, his performance tune, I didn't think sounded very good.
All right. I think if you had grown up listening to Usher, you may have felt differently. Like AK
That's
started
fair.
listening to him in college. Like if you grown up with him through middle school, basically, I think it would have been different. But anyway, do we think Julio paid for his own Super Bowl ticket, or do we think he was there on behalf of some brand too?
No chance. No way. Because he was sitting in a suite too. Julio's a very rich man, but would he be rich enough to buy his own Super Bowl suite? I mean, we're talking like that's like a $5 million investment at least. Or 9, actually. It might be 9.5.
No, I don't think he was in a suite. I thought he was just in a normal seat.
Oh, really? I thought he was in a suite. Anyways, wherever he was sitting couldn't have been cheap. But I don't think Julio Rodriguez is going to the Super Bowl paying out of his own pocket. He's too famous.
I would probably agree with that.
Yeah.
He's back in Arizona now, though. And if we want to talk for a couple minutes before we get to our Adam Jude conversation, which was awesome, by the way, as spring training nears, because we're getting real close to pitchers and catchers reporting. In fact, we're days away from it now. So spring training is very much on the horizon. We talk about a lot of this with Adam, but is there any storyline that you're looking at saying, hey, I'm really kind of itching to see this when the guys get down to Arizona and games start?
Well, big question I have every spring training is who's going to seize the opportunity in spring and play really well right out of the gate when you're not in rhythm, when you're not used to being back and playing every single day. And for the most part, it's pitchers who will jump out in spring training, and they have a bit of an advantage on the hitters. But in this case, I kind of want to see some life here from Dom Canzone. Life's not a very good word for that. I want to see Dom have a good spring training, because I think people will be much more comfortable heading into this season if you and I are not sitting here and saying, well, Mitch Haniger's got to play 130 games because that's the proven corner outfield bat in that spot for Dom. And we're coming off a season where Dom just destroyed the minor leagues and destroyed AAA, and he was the best hitter in the minor leagues. And you and I sat here on this podcast when that trade was made and said, hey, look, like this was one of the centerpieces of this Paul Sewald trade, because Dom Canzone has the upside to hit like this. Well, I think a lot of people would be a lot more comfortable, and I think you and I would be a lot more excited for Dom if he came out the spring training and started showing a little bit of what made him so special in the minors, with a really high contact rate and a really good zone discipline, not a whole lot of swing and miss, on top of hitting the ball as hard as probably about the top 80th percentile of baseball, which we know he can do. He's still young. I think people somehow got to realize that a little bit, but for Dom as what he's been tabbed as a hitter, that it would be really nice to see him come out and have a strong spring right off the bat, so people feel more comfortable about that corner outfield spot. And really, so the pressure is off of Mitch Haniger as he's getting up there in age and he's continued to battle his health problems. Okay, well, the Mariners don't have to rely on Mitch as much if Dom Canzone comes out and has a good season. And I think a good start of that would be him performing in spring. What I don't hope for Dom is that he has a Mike Zunino 2015 spring. Is that the spring I remember correctly, where him and Chris Bryant were dueling spring training MVPs, and then Mike Zunino ended up getting demoted to the minor leagues that year because he struggled so much. So I'm hoping that's not the case for Dom. And of course, we're biased to Dom because he came on here with the podcast with us, and that was awesome, and his interview was great. But I hope for the Mariners' sake and the lineup's sake as well that Dom comes out and he just crushes it. One last thing. We also haven't seen much social media videos of Dom. He's not really an online person, which, again, is very smart. So it's just going to be nice to see him like on a screen doing something, which is nice because we've gotten it from a lot of other guys.
I would not be shocked in any way, shape, or form to see Dom Canzone come out this year and hit 25 bombs. I would not at all. He's got the power to do it. He's been in the big leagues for a little bit now. He's got a whole offseason of adjustments. He's got his first full season with the new team, or with his new organization coming up. And he's just such a talented hitter. Like, you don't hit like that in the minors and hit like that in college and have none of it translate. I think he is such a breakout candidate. And if he can even just hit righties in year one, obviously you want to see him hit both sides of the plate long term. But if in year one, he is truly going to platoon with Mitch, not only does that take so much pressure off Haniger, where he only has to play half the games, they're against lefties. They'll probably get him some DH days every now and then. Or if Dom hits righties and he, like you said, barrels up the ball a decent amount, hits for some power, that's all you can ask for from the guy. I would not be shocked at all to see Dom have 20 to 25 bombs here in 2024. So if that starts out by him having a really good spring, great. That'd be great.
Yeah, we just need to also remember, as we get into spring training numbers aren't anything, but it would be always nice to see some signs as they roll along. So what storyline are you looking out for now?
Yeah, I was just going to quickly say that, well, better to have a good spring than a bad spring. Obviously.
That is true.
Yeah. So we probably buried the lead with this one. I cannot wait to see Bryce Miller start throwing splitters to hitters. We've just seen enough. Speaking of video, two polar opposite guys. Like Dom, bless him. He doesn't like to be on social media all that much, posting videos. That's not who he is. Totally respect it. Bryce Miller's been on social media a lot saying, look at all these splitters I've been throwing. And by the way, they look fantastic. Now, he's not facing live hitters. He's throwing bullpens. But I'm so ready to see it against live hitters because he's had the TrackMan data up for it. And he's had just the pure video off the eye test to watch. Looks so good. Like it just basically tabletops down. So to see it now get implemented against hitters, I can't wait.
It kind of rivals the excitement I had of watching Robbie Ray splitter last spring. Unfortunately, Robbie got hurt, so we didn't get to see the full fruition of that splitter coming out for Robbie Ray last season. But it's a similar scenario, Lyle, for the two pitchers. I mean, Robbie was essentially stuck with two pitches. You know, like, well, I need something else. I need a different sort of breaking pitch. So that's why he's breaking this out. Sort of the same reason for Bryce. And that's why we have the same level of excitement that you can play an explosive fastball with a pitch that moves like that. If you can't make a changeup work, if your slider isn't quite that pitch, then try the splitter. And the splitter seems to be working out stuff-wise. The question is how is he going to command it? What percentage is he going to throw it? Is he going to leave it at 5%? Is he going to tick it up to 10%? I don't know what the balance of that pitch is and how comfortable Bryce is going to be using it here in year one, which, again, you need to remember it's year one, so the pitch will probably not be perfect, but very exciting to see nonetheless in Bryce Miller's short spring training outings that he's going to get.
I think it's exciting, too, because since Bryce started to have, typical up and downs in his rookie year, we started to say, okay, you can't do this mid-season, but I think come the offseason, he's probably going to need to add a third pitch. We said that. We've said that for months now. We said, I think a splitter would make a lot of sense. So not only did he do to a T what we had kind of spoke or tried to speak into existence, but it also looks really, really good. And you're right. Like, he doesn't have to throw it a ton. He can throw it 8 to 10% of the time. It could even be a little bit less. But the key is just to have hitters you want to fool hitters with it, obviously, but just to keep hitters off balance a little bit where they can't just sit on two pitches. They can't just sit on the fastball slider. They say there is something else we have to gear up for. I think it's going to help him a ton.
He also needs another strikeout pitch because his fastball is his strikeout pitch. He needs a second one. Elite strikeout pitchers need multiple strikeout pitches. And even if your fastball continues to be your best pitch, if guys just sit on it, they'll continue to foul it back. And it won't be ultra efficient. So looking forward to this edition of Bryce Miller. It's going to be super exciting.
We can't wait. Speaking of the pitchers, speaking of spring training, we got into it with Adam Jude a lot. Before that, let's take a quick pause, talk to you about our friends over at Pagac's Pub 85 over in Kirkland. You guys know it's our favorite spot to hang out. There's great food. There's great drinks. There's pool tables. There's dartboards. There's 22 TVs in that place. You want to go hang out with your friends? We cannot recommend it enough. And if you want to go and get some great drink specials, go during happy hour. It's Monday through Friday from 2 to 6 p.m. You can get $3 domestic beers, $3 Manny's or $4 Manny's and Blue Moons, $4 Mac and Jacks, $4 Wells, and $4 house wines. All that and a good time with your friends is over at Pagac's Pub 85 in Kirkland. Yeah, I really enjoyed our conversation with Adam Jude. He was very, very informative and seems to have a lot of good thoughts on where the Mariners are headed in 2024.
Yeah, and this is going to be now his second full season as on the Mariners beat. Him and Divish will be sharing a lot of those responsibilities there. It is funny. He's going to be the one that's going to be poking fun at Divish this spring training with Larry Stone retired. So, I think we're going to catch up with Adam when we get down there in the second week of March. So I'm looking forward to getting an update on how he's going to how that's gone between the two of them. But it's good. But Adam gives a lot of very good information. He's a big sports guy. And as he liked to remind us at the beginning of the interview, he is out tenured Divish. So, he's got that as well. So it's exciting stuff with Adam, but we won't keep you any longer. Let's hear from our conversation with Adam Jude. Okay, we welcome on Adam Jude, sports writer for the Seattle Times. He's been there for over a decade now. Does it feel like a decade, Adam?
Yeah, In some ways it feels like 2, but yeah, just had a big anniversary this year. I'd love to remind Ryan Divish that I've got seniority over him by like 4 or 5 months. So that's the one thing I think I can hold over him.
What does that get you?
Not a whole lot.
Are you responsible for the bananas now at spring training with Divish now that Larry's gone?
You're going right to the meaty question, aren't you? That's a good one. I need to find a way to kind of make it my own and sort of terrorize Divish somehow, some way. Last year I bought a lot of vegetables. Maybe people know this, maybe they don't. Ryan is just notorious for his eating habits. I don't think he's ever eaten anything green in his life. And so I tried to kind of force feed it like I would with my kids, mix it up in a blender and sneak some spinach or something into one of his meals. And it didn't work, but I left a bunch of vegetables in the refrigerator behind last year. So maybe that's my thing is it's instead of a yellow banana, it's just something green just to gross him out somehow.
So it could be that. It could be you hiding his Crown Royal. You could hide it somewhere, right?
I mean, I'd hide it down my throat, but yeah. That's
Oh, where'd it go? I don't know where it went.
I have no idea. But yeah, we might partake a little bit, something like that too down there. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it. This is, year 2 for me, kind of full time, teaming up with Divish on the Mariners beat. And we had a lot of fun last year. The idea kind of came about, really going back to the 22 season. I jumped on board the final couple months just because obviously the team was good, making a push to the playoffs for the first time in forever. And our numbers were kind of through the roof. And I had a good time with it with Larry and Ryan. And Ryan kind of chronicled some of that on social media, our random, trip through Canada, wayward travels to get to Toronto for that playoff series. And then immediately back down to Houston for all that. We had a blast and we wanted to run it back. And then obviously with Larry Stone retiring, we were losing our best and most experienced baseball voice. And so it just kind of made sense, with where the Mariners are at, with the interest level in the fan base here to kind of have 2 people on the Mariners beat. And I was happy to team up with them and hopefully I can make Divish a little bit more sane most of the time when we're not talking vegetables. And I think year 2, we've got a pretty good plan going forward.
So what is the thing you look forward to most at spring training?
Ooh, that's good. I mean, definitely the sunshine after surviving, as you guys know, Northwest winter here. But, just it's fun to get up early. Everything is done early there, right? They've got their workouts early. You're kind of there. Feels like you've accomplished a lot even before lunch. Just you kind of see these workouts. You see these guys working out. You get on the grass out there a little bit. It's for a lot of people, and I think for me too, I just grew up a baseball guy. It's a cathedral. It's I wouldn't go so far to say it's a religious experience, but you're just kind of standing there on the perfectly cut grass in those backfields in Peoria, and you're seeing these guys work out, and not to get all cliche, but just to hear the crack of the bats and the pop of the mitts, and it's baseball, see, right? It's just, hey, we survived the winter, here we go. We're getting after it here, and so just getting down there and seeing all those guys, and obviously there's a ton of storylines we're going to be following and writing about throughout the spring here, and I'm excited just to kind of get to know a lot of these new faces in the lineup and just kind of hear the way these guys talk, and then some of those young pitchers, right? The high expectations. Can they not only repeat what they did last season? Can they take a step forward? And so just for the team itself, I do think I'm a little more bullish now that I kind of take a step back and had a couple weeks here to digest all the changes and look at the lineup and see what some of the projections are. I think I'm maybe as bullish as anybody about this team's chances this year. And so I'm curious to see how that starts to take shape down in spring training.
So that's a pretty good segue. After everything the Mariners have now done this offseason, it didn't start out on a very positive note. I think everybody knows that. But now for where they sit here in early to mid-February, how would you grade what they've done?
Yeah, I think this is about as good a job as the front office could have done, considering the constraints that they were under. Again, it was 10 days into the off season. I mean, season ends October 1st. It was October 10th that Xfinity made its announcement. They were basically doubling the price of the regional sports route package, and then the backdrop of all that too. And this is something I think Mariners ownership knew was coming down the pike for a while now. But, they're taking full ownership of Root Sports too. And that doesn't necessarily dramatically change things in terms of their financial outlook. It just kind of all came to a head it seemed like at one time, and at perfectly the wrong time for this organization with what they've been through and what they've done over the last 5 years. If you kind of take out last offseason and the moves they made last offseason out of the picture, I mean, I think they've done just about everything right in this rebuild. I mean, you just look at when you have to start over something like this, there's no guarantee you're going to pick the right prospects or find the right international signings or make the right trades. And again, they're not 100%, but I think the step-by-step process just to build a contender and then get to this point where obviously we can all see it, that looks like a team, a core foundation that is ready to pop. And what's the last thing you need? You need to supplement that with a couple key pieces. You need to spend at least a little bit, right? What could this lineup still use right now? It's some middle order to pop, a $25 million bat right now. And I think everyone would probably be pegging them as the favorite in the AL West. As it is, right? They've had to kind of piecemeal that together. And boy, what an offseason it's been. It's been strange. It's just been a roller coaster. And I know a lot of fans are still frustrated. You hear fans talk about, I'm not coming back until ownership, this and that. And I get that. That's totally valid. It's totally fair feeling and frustration to have right now too. But I think if you can kind of separate kind of some of the financial issues and what ownership has decided to do versus what front office has been able to achieve and able to accomplish with those constraints. Again, I feel like they've done about as good a job as you can do. Again, there may be a couple different bats or a couple different trades that maybe they could have swung or maybe pulled off, but not having to give up one of those two young pitchers or any of those young pitchers was a real priority for them. And I didn't think they'd be able to achieve it. I thought they would have to give up Miller or Wu to go get one of those middle order bats. And maybe that still, in hindsight, will be the right move if it was a legitimate Randy Arozarena type that we look back in 6 months and say that was still the one thing they're really missing. But again, you're kind of, trading from a strength to bolster a weakness. In the end, you only end up, 2 wins better anyway. Maybe it's all a wash. So long story short, yeah, I think they did a really good job just getting to this point. Obviously, it's a high variance, high risk approach with, we can get into all the, injury issues a lot of these new guys have had, and they're banking on these guys staying healthy. They do have some insurance a little bit for some of them. I don't think anyone expects Mitch Haniger, for example, to play, 130 games. They're not projecting that. They're not expecting that. But again, you need, 5 of the 6 new additions to really play 130 games. And maybe that's asking a lot, and maybe ultimately it's asking too much. But I do like the dynamic nature of what they've been able to achieve in this lineup and giving Scott Servais some flexibility at the very least.
Now, it's hard to get fans to agree on anything, an offseason grade, an acquisition, et cetera, et cetera. But what about some of the players that were outspoken towards the end of last season? I mean, how do you think Cal Raleigh approaches walking into spring training and seeing the new additions around him and making the observations he needs to judge whether or not he feels like they tried hard enough?
Yeah. And again, I think he probably has perspective enough to know, and I'm sure he's had ongoing conversations with Scott Servais and Jerry Dipoto and Justin Hollander too. Like, they want to keep those core guys involved and informed as much as possible. So, I think he probably understands the thinking on both sides of it. I think he knows where ownership is coming from too. And again, I applaud Cal Raleigh. He obviously really emerged as a team leader last year. It was Cal and JP, and I applaud Cal for speaking his mind. Again, ownership would kind of spin it a different way, but I think Cal would probably look at it as like, look, given the circumstances, we were able to make the team, the lineup, if not better, again, at least reimagined to the point where it looks like they should be able to score at least more runs, at least in a different way, right? I think they should be able to score more runs, and they should certainly be able to do it in different ways, right? They don't have to rely on the long ball as much this year. It's obviously still a big part of their game and the game in general, but it's not going to be the two true outcomes. And that was the one thing they identified, obviously, right away after the season, that they wanted to cut down on the strikeout rate. And they got rid of all 3 of their biggest guys, and Teo leaving for free agency, and then trading away Gino Suarez and then Jared Kelenic too. I don't think they wanted to trade away Jared Kelenic, and I think if they didn't have the financial constraints, Kelenic would still be on this roster, but they felt like that was a necessary move to obviously free themselves up to make the other moves that came down the pike later. But again, it's reimagined. It's going to obviously have a much different look, that lineup this year. And I think if you're Cal Raleigh, if you're JP Crawford, if you're Julio Rodriguez, you can see, hey, this has a chance to be better and perhaps significantly better.
So you mentioned the injuries a couple minutes ago. When you look at this offense, I think we're all in agreement where it feels more complete with less strikeouts than it did a season ago. But that being said, like, is it a legitimate concern when everybody talks about this lineup, they say, well, it's a good lineup if they stay healthy, like the if healthy thing. Do you think that is a legitimate concern?
Yeah, no, for sure. And again, I think it helps that, they do have some guys that still with, breakout potential for sure. I think the Mariners themselves are higher than on Dom Canzone than most, if not just about anyone. And we could debate that too. And part of it, I think, is that they probably need to pump him up, right? They traded their all-star closer, really, or stud closer to basically get Dom Canzone, and obviously Rojas coming in there, Ryan Bliss too, helped in that deal. But they need Dom Canzone to be a key part of this, right? Even if it's only as a platoon guy, 400, 500 at bats, like they need him to be a viable guy, and that remains to be seen. Obviously, just came up for the first time as a rookie midway through last year, and he's one of those guys that obviously as a younger guy doesn't have those health concerns, but he is kind of factors in some of that too. Like, oh, if we can only get 90 games out of Mitch Haniger, we still feel good because Dom Canzone can man left field, and we can move over Luke Raley over to right, obviously. And I do think we'll see that lineup anyway quite a bit against right-handers. And it is fascinating. And again, even a guy like Mitch Garver, professional hitter, a guy who's been around, he's got some pop. He was just in the World Series hitting third for a dynamic and deep Rangers lineup. There's a lot of reasons to be really excited about that. Think, oh, this guy can really, be that middle of the order bat, consistent bat that they need. But he's had those issues too, and they just don't know, right? You can say they've done all their homework that they wanted, that they needed to do on a Jorge Polanco too, and obviously they're not going to swing that kind of deal and give up what they gave up unless they feel pretty confident that it was sort of a fluke thing, that he's worked hard to, kind of push through that, and he's fully recovered now. And at the end of the day, they don't know too. Obviously, they have doctors and trainers that are looking at the medical evaluations, and they do all the testing with the guys. And so all they can do is, hey, this is what we've got. All indications are that things are going to be smooth for now, but you just never know. It's a long season. Guys play through a lot too. It's stuff we have no idea that they're playing through, and at some point they need to shut it down for whatever reason. But again, it's a high variance approach, high risk, high reward sort of lineup. And if it sticks, if they all stay healthy, relatively healthy throughout the year, I think it has a chance to be pretty good, at least a little bit better than league average. And with this pitching staff, I think that's probably good enough to get them back in the postseason.
You mentioned Dom Canzone. I think of Dom as a guy who could really benefit from a good spring training, especially he really petered out down the stretch last season and didn't show many of the qualities at the plate in September that the Mariners thought they were getting when they traded for him. Of course, he's young. He's got a lot of time to grow into it. So he could benefit from a really good spring training. Who is someone else that you think could really benefit from really just crushing it in Peoria over the next month and a half?
Yeah. I was just writing about, top of mind, kind of the third base situation right now. And I think that's the biggest question mark for the team, of course. And again, I think if they're looking at it from the grand view of things, it's like, hey, we did a lot to reconfigure this lineup. And if that's our biggest question mark is a platoon at third base where we're only projecting them to bat ninth anyway, if they can just be league average, right? Just league average, we're going to be just fine. And I think that's a reasonable expectation. Obviously, Rojas was pretty good for the Mariners down the stretch, really hot in August last year, but only played second base too. And the same for Luis Urias, shifted between, short, second, and third throughout his career. I really think there's going to be a significant drop off defensively for as good as Geno Suarez was the last couple of years. I was diving into some of the numbers. He was the third best third baseman in all of baseball and outs above average, and tied with Julio as the best defender on the team. Again, it's a trade-off. You get rid of all those strikeouts in your lineup, and you get rid of that contract, which was the main motivation in that trade too. But for a team that is built around run prevention, that's who they are. That's what they are. It's that pitching. It's that defense. I think it's a legitimate concern to wonder what that's going to look like at third base this year. Because really, and I wrote this too, Mariners fans have been spoiled over the last really 20 years. You go from Adrian Beltre, as good as there's ever been at third base. Kyle Seager made himself into one of the better third basemen in baseball, as steady as they come. And then Geno for 2 years, who was way better than the Mariners thought he would be defensively. And he worked really hard at that. I give him a ton of credit for that. I know Mariners coaches were really bummed that he wasn't even a finalist for the Gold Glove last year. I really think he should have at least been a finalist, right? He doesn't have the reputation that I think maybe you need. And now, again, it's just a huge question mark. To me, that's obviously the biggest thing in this lineup. But again, if you're the Mariners front office and you say, well, we've shored up second base really well. We've got the platoon at third. We'll find a way to make that work. And guess what? Come June, July, if it's not working out, they can pivot. Maybe someone like Tyler Locklear. I don't really think most people see him as a third baseman, but maybe he's a guy that hits. Maybe you can get creative with Polanco, who has played some third base. Again, not ideal, or maybe they go make a trade and maybe there's somebody available. I know people have brought up in the last couple of weeks, Matt Chapman's still out there in free agency. Again, in a lot of ways, yes, he'd be an ideal fit because that's the one hole on your roster right now, third base. Why not go get a Gold Glover, one of the best guys to do it over the last decade? But I just don't see all of a sudden the Mariners ownership changing tune at this stage of the offseason and saying, sure, we'll fork over $20-25 million for this guy. I just don't see it. Be a pleasant surprise, I suppose, for everyone if they did, but I just don't see it. I think they're determined to make it work and give Perry Hill, free reign to work with Rojas and Urias all spring and see what that looks like. It's certainly not the first time. It wouldn't be the first time Perry Hill has turned, pixie dust into gold, and we'll see what it looks like. But to me, I certainly be looking closely, not only just how they fit in the lineup, but defensively what that looks like, because obviously the pitching staff relies so heavily on their defense.
I'm just thinking in my head, that 5.5 hole makes a lot of people nervous. I mean, it has been well documented that a lot of JP's troubles has been going to his right. Sure, and if there's also a defensive question at third and a defensive question at second, and then you look at the bullpen structure, it's like, okay, 2 of your 3 best relievers are sinker ballers now. They're going to get a lot of ground balls, and they're going to put there's going to be a lot of chances for that infield to try and close out games. And then you still see, despite all of that, Fangraphs come out this week and say the Mariners are going to be the best run prevention team in the league. Yeah. I don't know how to add that up. Can you add that up?
Well, and then to add in more issues again, we bring up Dom Canzone, below average, defender in the outfield too, for at least from the small sample size we saw. I think he'll be fine, but I do think the outfield defense is going to take a step back too. As good as Julio is, he can't cover foul line to foul line. And so that's a question mark too. Luke Raley's, again, don't know a ton about him. Defensively, I'm curious to see him as well. I think ultimately that might wind up being their best move of the offseason. I just don't even know if Jose Caballero had a spot on this roster this spring. But, at the end of the day, I think the Rays were willing to trade Luke Raley because they probably just see him as a platoon guy. And obviously the Mariners just saw Caballero as a best of platoon guy too. So I could see how both sides saw the deal making sense. But again, to get a left-handed bat that can play the corner, that can play some first base as a Ty France insurance. He can fill in if needed in center field, for a few games here and there. Not that Mariners fans want that, but I think he's athletic enough and has played there at least a little bit. So that's a really intriguing addition as well. But that outfield defense, again, I feel like it's not going to be as strong. I just don't see it. And so, yeah, to your point, we'll see. Again, to me, that just all turns back to the pitching, and you're projecting, George Kirby. He's still got room to grow. I mean, as everyone loves to point out, he's not even he's done all this in his first 2 seasons, 3.34, 3.35 ERA, whatever it's been. And he's not really a strikeout pitcher either. I mean, he's the guy, I remember saying this a lot midway through last season, like, he's throwing too many strikes. And that's crazy to say because it's his superpower and he does it better than any young pitcher really in the history of baseball. But it's like, well, now everyone knows that. And so they're going up there, they're digging in, they're comfortable, they're ready to swing pitch one. And so not only does he need to get them to chase a little bit more, which he's been solid at, but yeah, obviously he needs that one put away pitch. And he was hoping the splitter would be that, year one. We'll see if he sticks with that or, again, if he's doesn't emerge as more of that strikeout artist, then he's going to rely on that defense more too. And you said that's part of the high variance on this team. And I can see where the models love it because the pitching staff is so good and this lineup has a chance to be more dynamic and just, I'm curious to see if they steal more this year. That's something I thought they would do more of last year. And certainly given the new rules, I think that was a fair expectation. So I'll be curious about that going forward this year too. But that defense to me is maybe one of the more underrated storylines here going into spring and just how big of a drop off is it really going to be?
So I do want to circle back to the pitching in just a minute, but while we were on the topic of third base, what with you and with I think a lot of people circling that as the biggest question mark in the lineup. So Jerry said a lot of points of this offseason, payroll will go up from 2023. He even said that after some of the Root Sports stuff. Whether that happens, we'll see. But if he sticks to his word on that, could you see one of two things happening at some point in the season? One, a bigger move at the deadline, or two, maybe another in-house extension at some point?
Yeah, good question. We could start with the in-house extension. Obviously, I think there's 3 guys that everyone would circle as 3 priorities. Would be Cal, Logan, and George, right? Cal's agent, I think everyone knows, is Scott Boras. I just don't see that happening. A big power hitting, switch hitting, defensive gem of a catcher at 27, 28 years old. If they were going to do that, the window was probably a couple years ago, and even then, I don't know if Cal and his reps would have entertained that. So I don't know. That's probably a non-starter. George, I again, still early in his career. You'd have to make it worthwhile for him. I just don't know if that's a priority for him. Logan is probably the best bet. And if I were the Mariners, I'd absolutely try. And maybe they have, we don't know. Again, I think the one thing that ownership will tell you this, if you question them on some of this stuff, obviously they invested heavily in their superstar center fielder. And they invested, in Luis Castillo right after the trade, and they're willing to do it on the guys that they know and trust and love. And again, I think all 3 of those guys would fit right into that too. So if the deal made sense and the player and the team were in alignment, it'd be a no-brainer. I just don't know in those 3 situations that it's really realistic at this point. And to circle back to some of Jerry's comments. Yeah, it's interesting. I know a lot of people have brought this up and just sort of are holding him at face value. I actually asked him the question at winter meetings. It was immediately after the Jared Kelenic trade, getting rid of Marco's contract and Evan White. And so the obvious, it's like, what's going on here? That was before we really had a full grasp of what the situation was with the payroll. And, I asked him the question, I was like, what's going on? Because they had sort of intimated, yes, that payroll would probably go up at least a little bit. And I think that was all of our expectations. And at that point, he even said he was very careful with his words. And I don't have the direct quote in front of me, but he said it is likely that payroll will go up next season. And so, again, when you use a buzzword like that, even you're hedging and likely. So there's no guarantee. What I think is that my guess is ownership basically told him, like, hey, we're going to be stagnant. Our plan is to be stagnant with payroll. If the right situation comes up, or if at the deadline things are looking a little more promising, maybe we can turn the dial up a little bit. Again, that's sort of my read on the situation. I do expect, what are they at, 135-ish right now or something? They were finished last year around 140. So again, Ryan and I have been basically reporting 140 to 145. And again, they don't really calculate that till the end of the season either. And so, yes, to your point, Lyle, I think that they want to leave themselves some wiggle room to be able to make a trade at the deadline if it comes to that. If there's one piece that they feel like, again, they did Luis Castillo, that they've said and they've shown that, hey, if there's a deal that makes sense, we're willing to take that big swing and take that risk and take on some payroll. At least that was the case a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. We'll see. I think it's a moving target, though, I do, because there is still so much uncertainty with the RSN situation, not just for the Mariners, but around baseball. We heard the commissioner talking about it this week. Texas Rangers, the Minnesota Twins. Minnesota Twins cut $10-20 million from their payroll in a very similar boat. And again, I'm not excusing some of the Mariners' decisions, but they're not the only one in this boat. And they're basically just saying, hey, we're kind of hitting a pause. Let's remain stagnant. Let's see how this shakes out. They've got some big decisions to make here, not only this offseason, but over the next year. What are they going to do with Root Sports? And how can they figure out the Blazers contract, Kraken contract? It's all pieced together. And again, if you're a Mariner fan, your argument is, why does our payroll have anything to do with the Blazers or the Kraken? And that's a fair argument to make. But from a Mariners ownership standpoint, it's all kind of all in one big pot, and they're just trying to figure out a path forward and what their options are. First of all, that's what they're identifying right now. Major League Baseball is pushing a lot of these teams hard, the smaller to mid-market teams, to pool together. They want to get everyone kind of under one umbrella, under a centralized organization, and really be able to pitch that to the streaming services or to the cable services or whoever. And it's a moving target right now. No one really knows what that's going to look like over the next year, much less the next 5 years. And so, again, the Mariners are kind of wait and see mode. They're exploring and trying to make some decisions. They say they're tough decisions. And again, they're not alone in that. So it all ties in. I don't expect them suddenly to, end the year at $160 million payroll. No, I don't think that's realistic, but maybe 145, 150. Again, if there's a Luis Castillo or a bat, again, that becomes available in the middle of the summer, that just makes sense. And they are able to swing it somehow for a couple minor league prospects who are really, really zooming up and getting a ton of attention. I think that would make a ton of sense. And I think that Jerry, in that situation, would probably be willing to turn to ownership. It's like, we have to do this. This is the move. We need to take on this $12 million remaining on this contract to get us over the top. We can win World Series with these guys. And if you're the owner, at that point, you've got to be like, I don't know what they'd say, but you've got to be like, okay, all right, we can do this. We can do it now. We'll see.
Lyle mentioned deadline acquisitions, and I'm surprised they didn't add more starting pitching this offseason, at least one, because you brought up a really good stat in your starting pitching preview article that was on the Times, and the Mariners' current starting rotation, as young as they are, like you just take a look at all the ages of that group, and it's pretty mind blowing. That group threw more innings as a rotation than any other rotation in baseball did last season, and that was with innings restrictions and nursing two young pitchers into the big leagues, and with all the injuries as well. That leaves me pretty surprised this offseason they did not go out and attempt to get a more proven starting pitcher without any innings restrictions. Because right now, I mean, you have 25 to 23-year-olds in the back of your rotation. It's a little nerve-wracking for a lot of people who are seeing that rotation stack up. So were you also surprised that a starting pitcher was not made more of a priority this offseason?
Yeah. I think, again, you got Emerson Hancock there. He's your number 6 right now. And again, a former first-round top 10 pick. And, I think the Mariners are really intrigued to see what he can do. Got those 3 starts last year before the injury. What could this team really use right now? It's Marco Gonzalez type, right? Pretty perfect as your number 6, the guy who you can tell him, hey, between rest days and between, injury insurance, whatever, you're going to get 20 starts and we want you to be the swingman too. That would be pretty perfect. But again, Emerson Hancock is that role right now. And I think they feel pretty good about that. Assuming he, and all indications are that he shows up to camp healthy and all that too. I think Austin Voth right now is your number 7. They're stretching out Trent Thornton. They might have to get creative midway through the season. maybe I feel like a Trent Thornton type is your perfect opener, right? If you just asking Brian Wu and Bryce Miller to, go 4 or 5 for a stretch there or something. And again, they'll probably have to get creative in that regard. Just penciling in Bryce Miller and Brian Wu for 32 starts is ridiculous. Obviously, they're not doing that. They're not
even Desclafani.
Yeah. But again, I remember thinking of that right away at the trade, like, oh, they'll try to flip him immediately, like that. But again,
say the volume innings made sense. I thought
100% that type of guy. But I guess the flip side too is like if your biggest question mark as a pitching staff is who is our number 7 starter, who is our number 8 starter, like that's first world problem. You're feeling pretty good, and so again. They don't have any name guys coming up through the system right now, certainly not through the upper ranks of the system. And so, they've been so spoiled the last 3 years, just like it's not normal to have just one stud after another coming year after year after year. And now they got to let those guys play out, see how it is. Again, this is pitching period in Major League Baseball, but certainly in modern baseball, injuries are gonna happen. That's just the nature of the game. That's the nature of being a pitcher. And you could say that's maybe the one thing that you could make a good case. That was the one thing that they should have had more insurance on this year. And maybe it'll come back to bite them. But again, if you're, Darren McCacken type will probably, Tommy Malone will probably end up back in their system at some point and making a couple spot starts here and there. Is that the worst thing? No, especially when your other guys are as good as they are. And again, I feel like that's what the Mariners, what they're able to find. They're so confident and they're so proven in their pitching right now. They can kind of brush that off and say, if that comes to pass, we'll make the best of that situation. Where they've shown they can handle bullpen days here and there, whatever. But yeah, again, when you're relying so much on young arms, particularly the 2 at the end, it is a little nervy for sure.
I feel like with everything that's happened this offseason, the one guy who seems to not having been talked about at all is the guy playing center field for him, who you saw some odds come out this week saying, oh, with Shohei out of the American League, Julio has a chance to be the MVP favorite. So to flip it back on you, what are some realistic expectations for Julio in year 3, if a certain definition exists of realistic expectations?
Yeah. Gosh, you look at his season last year too, and like he did all whatever his final numbers were, it was in like 30-30. And I mean, he almost gave up the first half, right? Like he was more or less league average for the first few months of the season. And like, there's still so much there. I mean, we all see it every day, just the talent, the build. I mean, I know Scott Service, he's a big football guy, obviously too, and he's close with the Seahawks. And Scott Service will go out to some Seahawks practices, and he's talked about looking at DK Metcalf, who's as impressive a physical specimen as I've ever seen up close. He's been around, just the combination of size and speed and strength. And he's like, yeah, that's Julio, by the way. That's Julio. And again, it's such a different sport. We don't see the physicality in that same way in baseball, but we just turned 23. He's still learning, still growing. You think about all the RBI opportunities he kind of left at third base last year and second base. That's not a criticism. It's just that's part of growing up and learning how to be a professional hitter and just taking that ground ball, seeing I'd single to right field with 2 outs and a runner in scoring position. I think that's the one thing he kind of had to learn that the hard way last year. And so I think just the overall run production for him this year, I really think has a chance to spike. And we've seen him just how, again, the most surprising thing about him is just how good he has been in center field defensively too. And you kind of take the totality of the ball player, and he's so good, and yet there's still so much more for him to grow as a 6-win player, as a rookie, 5+ win player, the second year when he really slumped for so long as well. Like, he's got a 10-win season in him probably at some point in his career, right? Maybe multiple 10-win seasons. Maybe this is it. Maybe this is when it shows up. It's hard, obviously, playing in Seattle in April and May, and your numbers are going to be suppressed, obviously, to a degree. But it's everyone would love to be Julio right now, right? He's got the world in front of him, and yeah, I mean, you got Juan Soto back in. Yeah, you lose Ohtani out of the American League, but here's Juan Soto going into maybe the best ballpark for his swing and his profile, and so it put Soto, Aaron Judge, obviously high up there. It'd be interesting now. Corey Seager, obviously already out, banged up. He's due for his, missing half a season. It's kind of his profile too. Like, he's been banged up quite a bit in his career, but certainly Julio's got to be right near the top of that list. And I would not be surprised at all if this is the year that, he kind of puts that complete season together and even runs away with the MVP.
Last baseball question for me, Adam. If we're gonna go 365 days in the future, what is your prediction of how the Mariners RSN situation looks then?
Oh, RSN. So I do think they are exploring what it will look like to join the, basically half the league and be sort of under the MLB branch, right? I think there's a lot of cost benefits for that just on the back end of the upfront production costs, and all of that stuff is really streamlined and it's shared. If you're sharing it, I think MLB wants, basically 15 teams or whatever. And then that's so much more product, so much more volume that they, again, can take to their partners and the streamers and really divvy that up in different ways. We've seen it already. They experiment with Apple on Fridays the last couple of years, and maybe Amazon gets involved. There's so much talk about that. Again, it's not even just baseball. It's college football. The NFL is going to Amazon the last couple of years on Thursday nights. I mean, MLB, I think, is at the point where they're going, oh yeah, we have so much product. It's every night, right? And that's part of, like, if you're the Mariners, that's part of the issue is it's so expensive to broadcast a game, and now they're footing the bill entirely on their own. And so they're trying to explore every option and every avenue. And if they can, split those costs 15 different ways, or with Major League Baseball, you're splitting the revenues too. And so they got to figure out the math and how to make that all work. And I think MLB is doing that right now too. Like, what is that revenue model going to look like? So I do think that is a viable option for the Mariners. And again, they're trying to figure out, they've got contracts with the Blazers, they got a contract with the Kraken, and those have to play out as well. And NBA and NHL are in similar boats too, as a league and as individual teams. They're trying to figure out best path forward. So I guess if you put me on the spot to say where are they going to be, there's a chance that they're under the MLB umbrella a year from now. And maybe that's the best path forward. It's going to look a lot different from a fan's experience perspective, as I understand it. It's, you're not going to have your, Mariners Magazine type stuff. You're not going to have your pregame, postgame, probably even. I think maybe that's up to each individual team, but it'll probably look and feel much different. You still have your, home team, individual broadcast team and all that too. But again, maybe for a lot of fans, like, you only turn it on at 7:10 and you turn it off right when the game ends too. And so maybe it's not all that much different, but I do think the unique nature, the home feel of, the Root Sports broadcast or whatever market you're in with your broadcasters and your analysis and the team that you're getting, and each team's different vibe and all that could be a lot different. But again, if it's one sort of overall feel where it's just a studio host in New York, kind of sending it to the local team, and it's going to feel, I think a lot more, just not as original. It's going to feel a lot colder, but that's just kind of the world we're in right now. It's a lot cheaper and it makes more sense. I think that's probably their best path forward.
So if we're going to transfer into just a couple of personal questions before we wrap this up, Adam, and when I say personal, just about like your own career and you growing up, and as somebody who's a Seattle native, did you grow up a big baseball fan? Like did you picture yourself one day covering baseball, or did you feel like you were always tied to a different sport?
No, I was always pretty open-minded. I grew up in North End, went to Mount Lake Terrace High School, peaked in my baseball career as a 12-year-old, Alderwood Little League, and but always loved baseball. I love to tell the story. My favorite, I think, sporting memory as a kid was the 95 playoffs. It was actually the tiebreaker game versus the Angels, and my parents came and got me from school, and then we went and picked up my little brother from his school. I had no idea what's going on, and they got last minute tickets to that game, and Mark Langston, I'll never forget, Luis Sojo, kind of inside the park grand slam, however many errors there were on that play. But I'm pretty sure we had it was definitely nosebleeds at the Kingdome, and I think we might have even been sitting against the concrete back wall on the 300 level. But yeah, that was an awesome memory as a kid, and that whole '95 run was a blast. I covered college football forever, and then doing Seahawks more or less the last 5 years or so. And in terms of kind of coverage and professionally, love covering football. I like the rhythm to it, but I was also looking for a different challenge in my career. And I feel really fortunate to be able to, like I said, team up with someone like Divish, who's been doing this for forever, right? He's the youngest looking 65-year-old you'll ever meet, but the youngest get off my lawn guy you'll ever meet too. But I think we complement each other pretty well. He's just a classic baseball beat writer. He knows everything that's going on. He's so good in the clubhouse. Like, he builds his rapport with the players, I think, better than anyone I've been around in any sport. And you trust them. And it's just a different culture. If we're comparing football and baseball to baseball, it's just every day, right? It's such a grind. And I do think players recognize the writers that are there every day, that are serious about it, that know what they're talking about and put some thought into their questions, or are prepared. And again, Ryan does that better than anyone, and I've learned a lot from him. And Daniel Kramer, as a young beat writer too, is as prepared as anyone I've been around. So it's been fun to get to know him and team up with those guys. And we certainly are going to miss Larry Stone this year. It doesn't feel real in a lot of ways. He's been doing it forever. He's actually going down spring training, I think, the day after I am, just because he's got a streak going of like 100 years. So he's got to be there. And it's great. Well, so it won't feel too different with Larry still there. But again, like I said, I was looking for a different challenge. I love baseball, and definitely different schedule, different rhythm to it. But I had a blast doing it last year, and I definitely learned a lot, and so made a lot of mistakes too. But looking forward to year two, and excited to get started.
You spent your entire writing career here in the Pacific Northwest, 9 years at the Register Guard, a year at the Oregonian, and then now 10 years at the Seattle Times. So I did notice 8 years at the Register Guard, overlapping with Chip Kelly. So I'd imagine he's going to come up in this question. I know Chip was quite the character back in his Oregon days. So the question I have is your best and worst interaction with a coach as a writer.
Ooh, best and worst. Yeah, maybe both have to do with Chip. Gosh, yeah. Chip and I had our battles. He was. I always tell people he was so good, like 4 days a week, right? Everyone would see the quips. The Aaron Andrews on the field, or he's telling the fans, the kids to shut up, and like he's legitimately, funny, got a great sense of humor. There were just some basic stuff where it's like he would go out of his way to not be helpful or be rude, whatever the situation was. And again, that's part of the dynamic, right? I get it. No one cares about the media and the media experience, and that's fine. I'll never complain about it. That's just part of the gig, and that's fine. Chip. I did have, a few battles too, and I would when I covered Chris Peterson at UW, I would tell him too, like, because I know he was pretty friendly with Chip, and I was like, yeah, Chip was this way about some stuff too. Be careful. And it was just mostly injury stuff. And, most football coaches are like this, right? They're so secretive, and it's just the paranoia, and that's just part of the job, right? It's such a grind. You're preparing, especially during the season, and the stress mounts, particularly when you're good, and you're rising the rankings, and that's when Chip would get the most frustrated and the most upset at beat writers asking the questions or trying to figure out, or a couple stories that I would break about injuries or whatever. Like, he would get so upset about that kind of stuff. It's like, dude, it's football. These guys are going to get hurt every day. It's just, I'm not hiding out in the locker room or chasing the ambulances after whatever. This is part of it. Everyone sees that this guy's hurt. Like, for you not to even comment on it is just so, it was just always so disrespectful to me, not just to the players, their families, whatever. But so I had a pretty good understanding, I thought, with Chris Peterson when we got to it. And I always tell people too, like, I think of all the coaches I've covered, I respected Chris Peterson more just for the guy he was and the approach he took, and as sincere as he was. And obviously he did a great job coaching and getting UW where it was. And I think he still deserves a ton of credit for getting getting the Huskies back on their feet and all that too. But yeah, I'm not sad. Right before we started recording this, Chip Kelly, the news broke that he was going to Ohio State as the offensive coordinator. It was very obvious he was trying to get out of UCLA. Wasn't a good situation there at UCLA. I've heard some stories about their NIL deal there and the lack of NIL money, which is everything in college football now. I don't recognize it at all in the 5-6 years I've been away from the game, but that's what today's game is all about. UCLA just did not have it going, and they're not going to be competitive in the Big Ten. And I think Chip saw that coming and has been looking to get out, obviously. So yeah, I'm not real sad. He's not going to be the Seahawks offensive coordinator. I assume in the decade since I've seen him last, he's chilled out a little bit, and I probably have too. But probably better off that he's still in college football as an offensive coordinator. I think that's probably a good gig for him.
I'll say you can't totally escape him because, I mean, Seattle's now Big Ten territory, so Ohio State will come. It was that's NFC West, it was Pac-12, and then it was still going to be Big Ten, and then to another Big Ten. So you just wish, like, could he go back to New Hampshire? Perhaps.
Yeah, that'd be the one. I could see him ultimately. Maybe he turns 75 and he finally circles back to there as his one last job. He's the type of guy where this is who he is. That's what he does. I think I just read he just turned 60. I was like, wow. He's like 60. And but he kind of feels like a lifer to me. It's just in his blood. And yeah, I can see that. I mean, he loves New Hampshire, and that's where he got started. It was a great story coming up for sure. It was a ton of fun to cover and chronicle. Him that just in 2007 with Dennis Dixon, when he just burst on the scene, it was like, everyone was like, what is this? And for them to kind of, nudge Mike Bellotti off to the side when they did, and his coach in waiting, and they're like, well, we're not waiting anymore. Chip Kelly's the coach. It was like, oh, okay. And it was ultimately the right move at the right time. And yeah, wow, what a run he had there. But yeah, it's been an interesting decade for him, that's for sure.
If we were going to wrap this up with one final question, Adam, is there a story you've written in your career that has either been your favorite or, in other words, the most impactful?
Oh, wow. I don't know, man. I'm not real great about remembering the stories. I just on the Mariners last year, I did have a ton of fun. I was trying to make it my goal to dive into the pitching stuff and just get to like, how the heck are they doing this? Like what's going on? Like I said, it's just not normal to be able to every May call up a stud pitching prospects. And that's obviously a credit to everyone in the organization, from the drafting and developing and all the way up to, Trent Blank and Pete Woodworth, the pitching coaches that make it happen. And they do such a good job of blending in the analytics and the kind of the traditional stuff. And you listen to a guy like Bryce Miller talk now, and he had, college, all he looked at was the radar gun, miles per hour. You just want to see how fast he's going. A couple years later, for him to be able to like detail out his pitch shapes and everything in the TrackMan and know how to apply that to his pitches and be able to make the adjustments from one start to the next just based on that. It's like, wow, that's really impressive. And so that was a ton of fun for me, getting to know those guys and getting to know kind of how they operate and how they've kind of come about this stuff. And so, yeah, it was the Pete Woodworth story in particular. That was fun, just getting to know him, his backstory, and finding out about, he was very, very good musician. He was in a punk rock band in high school that I sounded like he sent me his songs, and it sounded pretty dang good. And for that era too, in the early mid 2000s, like they were doing tours in Florida, and he made it sound like they had a chance to be like a real professional band, but had to make a decision like, hey, pretty good pitcher too. Ultimately, I think made the right choice. He was teasing that he made the wrong choice, but he's, again, there's one person described him to me, Pete Woodworth, as everyone's best friend, and you could see why the pitchers really trust him, and he's really able to get through to them. Trent Blank is a really smart analytics guy who can point to the numbers and all that and help them apply it. But it's Pete Woodworth who's able to get in their head and just tweak and turn the dials in the right way to really get them to believe in themselves. And so be able to kind of tell some of those stories was a ton of fun for me. And kind of again, I was generally kind of like to look at how things work or how they got to this point with different things. So definitely be looking to do some more of that this year, but probably should do some stuff on the hitting as well. But the pitching is always most interesting stuff for me. So that was a ton of fun.
Adam, this has been an absolute pleasure to have you on. We really appreciate you taking some time to join us. I know you're looking forward to getting down to spring. We look forward to reading all your coverage down there in the Seattle Times. So we really appreciate you taking some time to join us.
Thanks, fellas. Appreciate having me.
Great stuff there from Adam Jude. Before we wrap up the show, let's hear a word from our friends over at BetterHelp. Is something interfering with your happiness or preventing you from achieving your goals? Regardless if you have a clinical mental health issue like depression or anxiety, or you're just a human who lives in this world who's going through a tough time, therapy can give you the tools to approach your life in a very different way. That's why I'm excited to tell you about today's sponsor, BetterHelp. BetterHelp's mission is to make therapy more affordable and more accessible. And this is an important mission because finding a therapist can be really hard, especially when you're limited to options in your area. BetterHelp is a platform that makes finding a therapist easier because it's online, it's remote, and by filling out a few questions, BetterHelp can match you to a professional therapist in as little as a few days. It's easy to sign up and get matched with a therapist. There's a link in our description. It's betterhelp.com/marinelayerpod. That's betterhelp.com/marinelayerpod. Clicking that link helps support this podcast, but also gets you 10% off your first month of BetterHelp so you can connect with a therapist and see if it helps you. So if you're struggling, consider online therapy with BetterHelp. Click the link in the description or visit betterhelp.com/marinelayerpod.
Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that episode. With that, that'll just about wrap up this edition of the Marine Layer podcast. You guys know the drill. If you want to listen to the full form pod, you can do so wherever you get your audio podcasts. Make sure to download, make sure to rate and review 5 stars. It helps us out big time. Like, comment, subscribe on YouTube, and then check us out on social media. We're on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube Shorts at Marine Layer Pod. That's TJ. I'm Lyle. As always, we thank you guys for tuning in. We'll talk to you soon.